Okay, it's 3 o'clock and welcome folks to Encore Learning Presents. And there may be some noise in the background. Hopefully it's not too bad, but we had today a presentation entitled The Road to Second Chance. And let me see. And Toni Andrews will discuss her book, The Road to Second Chance. And we're going to have an opportunity to do things a little different than in the past. In the past, we've had people simply put their questions in the Q&A for the presenter to answer. And in this case, you could still do that, although I highly encourage people to raise their hand. Toni would love to have a conversation with people. So what will happen is you will raise your hand electronically. And the way to do that is find the icon that says reactions. You click on that first, and then you'll have a bunch of choices, and you'll find the one that says raise hand. So when you'll be in the queue, and what I'll do is that when it comes time, I'll let you know that, say, Barbara, we're going to open your mic, and then I will open your mic and you'll be able to ask your question. Now, keep in mind, we actually are recording this. So just be aware of that. You can actually put in whatever name you want. I'll only use first names, but we do encourage you to use that method. But we'll filter in written questions from the Q&A, the normal Q&A function that we typically use. So also, as always, you have the option of having live transcript. It's under your control. By clicking the icon, you either have the closed captions on your screen, or you click it if you want to get rid of them. When you leave the webinar, you'll see you have the opportunity to take a survey. Please take it. It's very short. I encourage you to take it. And also, if you have any technical Zoom problems, send an email to info@encorelearning.net, and they'll help you troubleshoot. And just let you know of upcoming events. So in terms of this Monday series, our next one is April 15th, tax day, I guess. Hopefully people won't be too busy that day finishing their taxes. And it's on book banning and how America's libraries are countering censorship. So that's something that's been going on a lot of different places, and I think it's a very topical issue. And also, just let people know, at least for members, Encore Learning members, we have a tour on April 5th, touring the Tudor Place, which is a 5.5 acre federal period architectural building and grounds in Georgetown. It has wonderful history. And so they'll talk about all those things. I think that's going to be a wonderful tour. I'm going to sign up. I haven't yet, but if you're interested and are a member or want to become a member, please do. And you can go to the website and sign up for that. So I just want to let people know of that opportunity. So let me stop my share, and I'm going to pass it on to Louise Kenny to do the introductions today. Go ahead, Louise.
Thank you, David. Again, I think many of you know me. I'm Louise Kenny. David and I and Chris McLaughlin and others are involved with the special events group here at Encore Learning, and it's a fun group to be in, and we get to feature authors and prominent people in the community like Toni Andrews. So it's really kind of fun to be in the group. So if you'd like to join us, please do sometime. I'd like to also welcome in particular the members of the Mason community, because one of your own, Toni Andrews, is speaking. So we extend a particular welcome to you. Toni Andrews is a local person, local, she told me, really for her whole life. She lives in Alexandria, but she works at George Mason as the Senior Associate Director for the Office of Community and Local Government Relations. So she's key liaison with partners throughout the community. She's had an interesting career in journalism, government affairs, and media relations, having worked at the White House. She's also prominent in a lot of local organizations, and particularly in Alexandria, being on the bipartisan leadership team with the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School for Peace. She's also been involved with the Chamber of Commerce here in Alexandria, rebuilding Alexandria. So she's really a very accomplished local person. And now she's a budding author, having releasing or publishing her first book, The Road to Second Chance. So Toni will tell you a little bit more of her background as she evolves, but it is my great pleasure to welcome Toni Andrews. Toni?
Hi, Louise. Thank you guys very much. I appreciate it. It's quite an honor to be here. I'm grateful to everyone who's tuned in. I so admire Encore Learning and your commitment to lifelong learning. It's such an important thing, especially in the times we're living in. So I wanted to share a little bit about how I came to write the novel and then delve into one aspect of the story. It is my debut, but it took years. And to quote Ernest Hemingway, if there's a story in you, it's got to get out. And this story has been in me for quite a long time. It's taken a different format here and there. Circumstances have changed, but it was my intention always from the beginning that this would be historical fiction and that it would be set during an era that I knew the best, which was the era between JFK and the 9/11 terrorist attacks, obviously a very turbulent era. I knew it would be about a family, and I knew the family would be from West Virginia. West Virginia, that's my roots. That's where my father was from. He was the grandson of a coal miner. He grew up in West Virginia in the Depression era, hard times. West Virginians are such hardworking, often maligned and mocked, most unfairly, I think. So part of my goal was to show just how unfair this is. And in fact, I would say, and I hope you'll agree with me by the end of the talk today, that the good people of West Virginia may have saved us all from nuclear war. I love history. And so, as I said, I wanted to set it between JFK and 9/11, a very defining era. And it is a story focused on a family, the Martin family. Gil is the father, Faye, the mother, Neil, the oldest brother, and the youngest, and the character who is the main character, Laney May. The mother, Faye, is a very critical character in the story. Her family, the Hartmans, are a coal mining family. They have a hard life, and they are they're not quite well-to-do, if you can imagine. And I intentionally correlate the Faye's family, this Hartman family, to the Kennedys. And in fact, in the story, the mother Faye often jokes that they're a poor version of the Kennedys, because like the Kennedys, both families have they have a strong patriarch. Both families are large. A devoted matriarch who has 13 children, which was not uncommon in rural settings, to the Kennedys' 9 children. Some of those sons, as with the Kennedys, would die in the US in war. And there's even a family member in the Hartman family with intellectual disability, Down syndrome, one of my favorite characters. Her name is Harriet, and everybody calls her Harry. She has Down syndrome. And in many ways, she ends up being the hero of the story. So the similarities obviously end there. The Hartmans are poor. They're hardworking coal miners, contrasts greatly with the Kennedys. So what I want to do now is take you back to 1960. And you see on your screen now a photo, one of my favorite photos of President Kennedy, Senator John Kennedy, campaigning in West Virginia. The West Virginia primary was a really key political event. And I think sometimes we forget how pivotal it was. You know, here comes John F. Kennedy dressed in his nice suits with his flat A Boston accent. He was not expected to win. You may recall that his being a Catholic was really, really a difficult situation. We had never elected a Catholic, and there was much animosity toward him being a Catholic. And West Virginia was quite the Protestant state. He was running against Hubert Humphrey. No one expected JFK to win the state. In fact, he trailed Humphrey by 20 points at the beginning of the campaign there. So he had to go all in. And one thing that is noteworthy, as you can see in this photo that's being shared, is seeing the way the other half lived, so to speak, really impacted Kennedy. Again, coming from this affluent background of privilege, to see how much poverty there really is right in the United States, in a state like West Virginia. So despite the odds, the good people of West Virginia gave him a victory. He won 50 of the 55 counties in West Virginia. And I think it's safe to say without winning West Virginia, he probably would not have become the Democratic nominee in 1960. And that means he wouldn't have ever become president in that era. Maybe years later he would have, but in 1960, without winning West Virginia, I doubt he would have been our president. And he took the religious issues straight on. He would say on campaign stops, no one asked my brother what his religion was when he got into his ill-fated bomber plane at the end of World War II and died. No one asked what his religion was. And he just asked for fairness and to be allowed to lead based on his own merits. So he said later, too, I would not be where I am now, that is president, had it not been for the people of West Virginia. So I have this family in West Virginia. It's 1960, and you get to see that JFK comes campaigning. I weave this historical fact into the story about this family. And the family all turns out to see him at a campaign stop. And Faye thrusts little Laney Mae into JFK's arms, even though he wasn't known to be a typical politician and kissing babies. And they get a photo of him. And Faye is just so certain he's going to be president and so excited about him. And she tells him that she thinks it's time people start asking what they can do for their country instead of what their country can do for them. Sort of gave JFK a famous line. So this is a story also about a time in our country, what our national family was going through. And no one could foresee, obviously, the national trauma that begins with JFK's brutal murder. And yes, we've had other presidents assassinated and horrible tragedies and war, but this was our first television death, followed by, next slide, please. Next slide. Followed by the 2 days after the assassination when Jack Ruby on live television kills the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. This was a real live TV murder that we were in our living rooms watching on television. And of course, immediately questions begin swirling, this disbelief of what we were seeing. So, as with JFK's death, he was sort of the father of our country, at the time, of course, a very patriarchal society at the time. Our national family loses him. But also for this family, a defining moment shatters the Martin family when the father, Gil, is killed in a car accident on a cold winter night in 1962 on an icy mountain road while out with another woman. Who was she? Why is he out with her when he should be at home with his family? Swirling questions. And the wife, Faye, assumes the worst, that he was cheating on her. And in her humiliation and anger, she refuses to ever speak his name again. She throws out all of his things. And then short time after that, she uproots Laney Mae and her brother Neil and moves to the suburbs in Northern Virginia. But even though they happen at different times, I intentionally correlate his death with JFK's death. Two men, one a president, young, admired, inspiring, and one a father, young, loved, and vital to his family. Two sudden deaths, a nation and a family devastated by the loss. Swirling questions around the deaths, the suspicions, the angst, and all this becomes an obsession. And the obsession about what happened to John F. Kennedy exists to this day. I think you probably have all seen newspaper stories, podcasts about it. And likewise for the main character, Laney Mae, she's only 2 when her father dies. She has no memory of his face. Remember, Faye has thrown out all of the photos. And hers becomes an unhealthy, lifelong obsession about her father. Who was he? What did he look like? Did he love her? Was he really bad and burning in hell, as her mother tells her often? And for both of these people, a big what if. What if Kennedy hadn't been killed? What if Gil Martin hadn't died? How would we be different? How would Laney Mae's life be different? So before I go on, I do want to ask a poll question, 2 poll questions. And the first one is, actually, that's the second, but we'll go ahead with this one. Regardless of who shot JFK, let me know, yes or no, do you believe there was some sort of cover up to conceal the truth about what happened that day in Dallas? So please take your yes or no. And we have one other question. Do we have the other question, or have we gotten some results? I'll give you a couple minutes to vote. Your opinion on that? And then the other question, oh, okay. So regardless of who shot him, do you believe there was, that's very close with the majority saying yes. They do believe there was something not done right in the investigation, something that did not pursue the truth. Okay. And then the other question was, do you believe, when you have a chance to put that up there,
Toni, it's not letting me launch it again. Sorry.
oh, that's okay. All right. Do you want to take that down?
Wait. Yep.
Okay. Well, I have my other question was, do you believe there was some sort of conspiracy to kill Kennedy? And I would imagine that in all likelihood, your answers would probably mirror this, because if you think there was a conspiracy to kill him, you likely believe that the truth was not shared. So we can close the poll question. Thank you. So again, most Americans do believe that there was a conspiracy. It may have been some rogue factor, some dark individuals who came in from the CIA or the FBI, the sort of the rogue characters. Others believe maybe that Oswald did it all, one shot. But it's still such a relevant story, and I find it fascinating. In fact, recently there was a Secret Service agent who was in the detail that day who finally revealed all these years later that he had found a bullet in the back of Kennedy's limousine. That would have been a fourth bullet, and that was never accounted for. And there are podcasts galore about this. Rob Reiner and Soledad O'Brien just did one called Who Killed JFK? And it's a really well done podcast. I encourage you, if you're interested, to listen to it. So for my purposes, JFK's assassination was a critical turning point in our nation's history. I grew up fascinated by him and his death. And if you could go to the next slide, please. This is why. This portrait that you see a picture of was actually on Friday, November 22nd. It was hanging in the Pentagon. My father was in the Navy and he worked in naval operations. And I was only 3.5, so I don't remember a lot. But from what I heard from the story was that he was home that morning and he was out picking up leaves in our home in Alexandria. My grandmother was inside with me. My mother was at work. My sister was at school. And she waved him in with the news that Kennedy had been shot. It wasn't clear if he had been killed. And out of obligation, I guess, my dad put on his uniform and went into the Pentagon. And that day, they began taking, when his death was announced, they began taking Kennedy's portraits off the wall. And you could not do this today in the federal government, but folks in his department put names in a hat and drew names. And my dad happened to be one of the individuals who was selected to be able to take one of these portraits home. And I can still see him walking in the door with this portrait that looked to a 3.5-year-old, larger than life. And I became quite fascinated with his death. It was really my first death. And I think for a lot of us, it was not only our first televised death, but if you were young enough, it was really your first effort to try to comprehend death. So I became quite fascinated. I think that's what led me to want to incorporate this historical event in a story. I studied it. I went through old Life magazines. I read all the books I could on him. And this is my perception of it, but I just feel like I came to believe that everything changed. Our culture, our politics, the social rules, movies, music. For example, in 1963, before November 22nd, You had songs, popular #1 songs such as Our Day Will Come, It's My Party, Sugar Shack. And then just a short time later, by 1965, you have We Gotta Get Out of This Place and Eve of Destruction. And of course, next slide, please. Just a few years later, you have the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. And this song, I shouted out, who killed the Kennedys, when after all, it was you and me. And that was actually recorded in 1968, just a day after Robert Kennedy was killed. So these assassinations and all this turmoil definitely had an impact on all of us. So in The Road to Second Chance, Laney May becomes fascinated by a portrait of John Kennedy. I borrow from that experience in my life. And it's something I bring to the story from my own experience. And he becomes, to this poor little lonely girl, he becomes sort of a void for her dead father. And she also develops imaginary fathers because she is so confused and her life has been turned upside down. And I want to read just one brief excerpt from the book to sort of introduce you to her and how she is thinking in this era and how it has impacted her. Next slide, please. This is a very popular photo that was in Life magazine in one of the issues after his death. And this is a first book account. Laney May tells the story in first person. When I was around 10, I became obsessed with a photo in Life magazine in the issue published a week after JFK was assassinated. Mama, Faye, Mama kept the magazine on the top shelf of our coat closet. This was where she would continue to keep copies of newspapers and magazines to document major historical events of our lifetime. I would carefully take the magazine down and study it cover to cover. The photo I obsessed over was of JFK and Jackie as they walked together, having just descended the steps of Air Force One in Dallas Love Field on that brilliantly sunny day. They are larger than life in the full-page photograph. He, dashing and handsome, toying with the button on his suit jacket. She, lovely in her pink suit, red roses cradled in her arms, with a shy smile on her face. It was a moment frozen in time, a moment just before they stepped into the presidential limousine to begin the motorcade through Dallas that would end with his brutal death. I would stare at this photo, mesmerized with the knowledge of what was going to happen next. I would fantasize that I had magical time travel powers and could somehow step into that photograph and stop them. No, don't get in that car, I would tell them. They would listen to me, heed my warning, get back on Air Force One and safely return to Washington. He would live. None of the bad things that happened after he died would happen. Our country would be spared the shocking loss. We would be safe and everyone would be happy. Of course, I had the same ideas about my father's death, although I had to imagine what he looked like. I fantasized that my magical powers of time travel would allow me, his daughter from the future, to go back to that terrible night in January 1962. I would stop him from leaving home, warn him what would happen, throw myself at his feet, and grab hold of his legs to keep him home. He would never get in his car, never pick up the other woman, and their rendezvous with a coal truck and subsequent death on that icy mountain road would never happen. Instead, he would stay home, play records, dance with me in his arms, and as with JFK, none of the bad things that happened after my daddy died would happen. Our family would have been spared a shocking loss. We would be safe and everyone would be happy. So she's obviously convinced in this before and after, this little character's trying to cope with all these things happening in this world of ours. And the event, the Kennedy assassination, forced us to take a deep look inside of ourselves and our society. And we began to question who we were. Likewise, in the novel, Laney May, her whole life is consumed with questions about her father. Her mother tells her that man was a liar and a cheat and got what he deserved and is burning in hell. And Laney May is insecure. She's sad. She's lost. In her young mind, she believes that if her father was bad and in hell, as her mother tells her, is some part of her bad too? It inhibits her from going forward, and she lives her life dwelling in the past. And after JFK's murder, as a nation, we're in shock. And we pondered the undercurrent of political hatred that perhaps at the time most Americans were not aware of, that could result in such a brutal act as an assassination of our president. Remember, there was no 24/7 news and no social media at the time. Next slide, please. Many of you may have seen this. This was a flyer that was distributed in Dallas the day before President Kennedy's arrival. And there was also a newspaper, full-page newspaper ad very similar to this, without his mugshot. And some of the things that he was accused of in this ad was betraying the Constitution, turning the sovereignty of the U.S. over to communists, giving support to inspire racial riots when he was really advocating civil rights. And this one really makes me just roll my eyes. He had illegally invaded a sovereign state, not Cuba, Alabama, by forcing integration. And he was also accused in this wanted for treason as appointing anti-Christians to the Supreme Court of the United States. So as time went on, and you know this, we have grown suspicious of our government and its ability to prevent something like this from happening, but also in determining what really did happen. That's why I wanted to know what you thought. If you think they didn't pursue the truth, if you think there was perhaps some cover-up, even if it was intended as to prevent division or war, if a foreign actor had been involved. Well, after JFK's death and the assassination of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy, our politics, as you know, has taken on a surreal aura. Just think of 1968, an incredibly turbulent year. And so we're asking ourselves, are we a civilized democracy, or are we a society spiraling into chaos? Then, of course, came lies about Vietnam, Watergate, the revelations about CIA clandestine operations that seemed pulled by a James Bond novel, from a James Bond novel. Our distrust in our government grew. No weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Were we really that surprised? Cynicism, national dysfunction. And in my novel, Laney Mae's family becomes dysfunctional after Gil's death. That's what death can do, this sudden, shocking death, particularly if there's mystery about it or scandal of some kind or unanswered questions. She and her mother and her brother Neil are haunted by this death. Bad things do happen to them, sad things, upsetting things. And she becomes obsessed to an unhealthy degree. As I would suggest, our nation has become somewhat obsessed with JFK's death and this distrust of government. And in this story, Laney Mae grows into adulthood. Her obsession with her father's death takes a big toll on her ability to have relationships. Her marriage ends. Her young son suffers. Her teaching career seems meaningless. She doesn't know who she is. As she explains at the beginning of the novel, when her mother is dying and she's desperate to finally get her mother to hopefully talk about Gil Martin, say his name, tell her something about him. Laney Mae says, if I knew better who he was, I would know better what I was made of and find the sense of purpose and courage that I lacked. So how does all this tie together, and why is it relevant today? And please keep in mind that this is my perspective. This is not the opinion of Encore Learning, but here's how I look at it. And I welcome this in the discussion. After Kennedy's death, after the shoddy job the Warren Commission did, after its failure to pursue the truth, our distrust in our government and in the man, is what we used to call people of power, all that grew into great distrust. And this happened decade by decade. And then you add to that 24/7 news and all the changes in the information age that delivered bad and disturbing news to us around the clock. And not only that, but news channels that were themselves aligned with particular political persuasions. So now you can watch the news that you want to hear versus the news that is really happening. And so I look at this and I think it's only a matter of time before someone would come along and tap into our anger, fuel our fears, fan the flames of deep state conspiracies. And where John Kennedy espoused public service and good government, A new kind of politician now demonizes government bureaucrats and fans conspiracy notions of secretive government operators pulling strings against real Americans. And while John Kennedy summoned us to ask what we could do for our country, some politicians summon individuals to rebel and, yes, mount an insurrection when they don't agree with the outcome of an election. And I asked, could there be two more different political leaders than John F. Kennedy and Donald J. Trump? And I didn't really think so until I noticed something interesting. Again, my observation, no statistics, I haven't surveyed, but it seems that people who support Donald Trump, the ones that I've talked to, comments I've seen, they also seem to revere John Kennedy. And I think the reason is because they collectively believe Kennedy was murdered, that the government was involved with the killing and the cover-up. Our government is evil, they think. It lies to us all the time. We cannot believe a word we are told, especially if we don't like what we are being told. We must resist. We must stand back and stand by. I happen to believe personally that there was some conspiracy to kill JFK and that the Warren Commission failed miserably to pursue the truth. However, I still trust my government. I still believe in the rule of law, and I still believe in public service. I still believe ours is the greatest nation and system of government in the world. And yes, we have to question our leaders, and we ought to have a healthy skepticism as citizens. But I do not believe there's a conspiracy around every corner, a conspiracy to explain all the things that happen that we don't like. And I wonder if it's possible that we can ever quiet the chorus of conspiracy theories about everything from JFK's death to climate change to the pandemic and every difficult occurrence in between. Is it possible for our nation to heal from the political polarization that has evolved? Can we get to a place when the simple truth about something is just that, the truth, even if it's too difficult, tragic, or objectionable? So an intense fascination of JFK, like Laney Mae's lifelong obsession about her father, has transfixed many in my generation, and his death remains relevant today. And in my opinion, I think we just have to accept that we will never know what really happened or didn't happen. And to heal, we have to give our nation a second chance. And that's what Laney Mae learns when she goes on this journey and this story, that we have to forgive, because forgiveness is the ultimate second chance, and it's probably the hardest thing to do. And I think that we need to discover as a nation what we're made of, as Laney Mae wondered what she was made of, and disavow those who would use fear and doubt to divide us for political gain. And the last slide, please. And to quote Kennedy himself, let us not seek to fix the blame for the past. Let us accept our own responsibility for the future. So thank you. I'm happy to open this up now for questions, comments, discussion. I appreciate you doing the polls.
Okay, so let's see if we have anyone that has raised their hand. Let me go to the attendees. And so hopefully, let me see. So I don't see anyone. Does anyone want? Well, Louise, you had a question that you're going to pose to Toni?
I do, David. Yes, thank you. So it's quite interesting your own evolution in starting out with a story so long ago and then evolving it as time evolved and events presented themselves. What was your initial concept? It was an obsession with JFK, but you then evolved that to a storyline. But what if in one sentence, what was the core of your initial concept that you said was living inside you?
Well, I think it was how these big events, like the death of a president, the murder of a president, impacts us all. We're not just observers. It impacts us. And I thought it was important to tie it to a similar, to have a correlation between a death in a family. So Kennedy and West Virginia, by studying him, I came to understand how important West Virginians were to him becoming victorious and becoming president. And literally my blood can boil if I read comments or people mocking individuals from West Virginia. And I wanted to portray that. I wanted people to understand that they gave him a chance, and that was important to me. It was an important part of history, I think. So it sort of started there, but again, I had to experience grief. I had to experience death. I had to. 9/11 affected me terribly. The story actually ends on 9/11, and I talk a lot in this book about what is patriotism too. Faye, the mother, is so patriotic that she literally will stand for the national anthem when she's watching a baseball game on TV. So how do we define patriotism and the meaning in our lives when something bad like this happens? As Lainey May becomes obsessed and she can't have her relationships suffer, so have the relationships in our country and our society suffer. We don't trust each other anymore. So a lot of these things just sort of evolved over time. The original story was, I laugh and say it was almost sort of like a little house in the prairie on the coal in the coal mining town. It was going to be a very simple sort of family, borrow from my family history and create some really fun characters. And that's not at all where this ended up going. And it took time. And I think it's important that I took the time to write the story I really wanted to write.
Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, we have our first question from the audience, and Mitch, I'm going to allow you to speak. Your mic should be open. Mitch, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Toni.
Hi, Mitch.
Thank you so much for sharing this gift with us.
Sure.
I'm sorry if I missed it, but did you explain how the folks of West Virginia may have averted a nuclear war? That
Well-
really caught my ear in the beginning.
Yes, actually what I mean is during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you're right, I should have put this clearer, but I would have just tried to imagine if Richard Nixon or Lyndon Johnson, leaders in their own right, experienced men in their own right, we may have various opinions about them, but I think that the one thing that Kennedy gets the biggest credit for is avoiding a nuclear holocaust when Russia put missiles in Cuba. And because of his cool, detached manner and his real fear of seeing his and millions of children and their lives end. It was, I like to draw again, my father at the Pentagon kind of got wind to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he and my mother drove my sister and I to stay with relatives in West Virginia until things died down, because it was so scary. So I like to believe that the good people of West Virginia, in their wisdom and their fairness, and by giving him a huge majority win in the West Virginia primary, gave him the opportunity to become on the nominee for the Democratic Party and then also the president. And I do think that was very important to what was coming just a couple years later.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. Great. So now we have one from Jerry. I'm going to open the mic. Jerry, go ahead and ask your question.
Sure. I appreciate very much your balanced view of the fact that we have to take a positive outlook, and at the same time, the level of distrust that we have in our country. I'm curious about the conspiracy theory, however. As someone who worked in government, I know how utterly impossible it is to keep secrets.
Mhm.
And it always surprises me that people have these conspiracy theories about government, because I know from my experience it would be almost impossible. I wonder if that doesn't somehow project people's sense of distrust overall, and their own feeling that they don't have control of their own lives. So they project that. I'm just wondering.
I think that's a very good point. And Lainey May finds out why her father was really out with that woman. And it was actually a very good reason. It was a gallant reason. She discovers some amazing things about him. And just as with Kennedy's death, I just think whether, again, intentionally or to hush things up and get us out of the mental state we were in, the Warren Commission did not do a good job. And they left too many questions unanswered. And it haunts us because at the end of the day, we just want the truth, right, as a people. But I agree with you. human beings are not known to be able to keep very good secrets. And I don't believe in a, high level, although some people do, very intricate conspiracy involving the highest levels of government, the way perhaps Oliver Stone portrays it in his film JFK. But I do think, a conspiracy is more than one. I've even thought it could be conceivable that Oswald was shooting and somebody else was shooting and they didn't know each other, that they were shooting. It could be that simple. But that's still two people. But the animosity toward Kennedy, as witnessed in those flyers, it may not have been representative of all the people in Dallas, Texas that day. And there were many, many wonderful people who showed support and came out to cheer him on such a tragic day. But I think you're right, Jerry. I think that we can, those that want to believe there's a conspiracy around every corner, I think that does become an obsession. And that's one of the things I try to point out. And how we undo that, I really don't know. But I know that for the character in my book, she just needed to know the truth about her father. And I think, we need to know the truth about what's going on and understand that governments are good and bad, and there are good and bad people in government. And that doesn't make our entire government bad or distrustful. And I think that harkens back to this need for a return to a sense of patriotism in the sense of public service. The very things I think JFK talked about, instead of serving our own agendas. Thank you for the question, though.
Yeah, I think actually, based on that discussion there, I think we might go to a couple questions that are a good follow-up on the Q&A. So one of them is, do you think the Warren Commission failed to investigate Jack Ruby and his killer? I always wondered why Ruby killed and was in turn killed. That comes from Carol. I think that's a very, very, very pointed question there. If you want to go ahead and take
Right. I think that most of the assassination theorists would say that Ruby had a very different background. He wasn't just a nightclub owner mourning JFK's death and trying to spare Jackie Kennedy a trial. There are accounts of that he and Oswald knew each other. And it obviously looks like a hit, doesn't it? The shock, I can't imagine seeing that on TV. I just know the shock of watching national television live and seeing somebody gunned down like that. And certainly, no, I think they wanted it to be Oswald. Why? You'd have, various reasons, and it had to be neat and tidy. And we needed to move on and put this behind us. But you don't move on from something like that easily. And as I said, I think that there was this before and after. Whether you liked John Kennedy and his politics or not, it was a very traumatic time. And we never got to heal. We never got to find out the truth. We still don't have the truth. And that's where obsession comes from, much as it does for the character in my story.
Yeah, and I think we also have this comes from the Q&A and from Vivian. It's kind of a lot of what you've been referring to. She said, I totally agree with your presentation. I believe it will take several generations to right this sinking ship of a nation that we are experiencing. Do you agree? So I think we've been talking a lot about that, but go ahead and if you want to elaborate some more.
Well, yes. If you read the news about, my mind is blanking as to where it occurred at was it in Arizona? Citizens got out, and I think it was last week, and stormed toward the elected officials. They were in fear of their safety, and it was just chaos. And those are the things that I think are most scary, and it's frightening and disturbing to think that people really believe these conspiracy theories, and it makes them lose sight of what is right and what is wrong and what is good and what is really bad. And I think it's a very dangerous thing. I think what I wanted to get across in this book is what a great people we are. And I thought of my father a lot when I wrote this. And I've often said I'm glad he was not alive on January 6th. It would have killed him. It would have broken his heart. and to see that happen. And so people that say, those individuals are misunderstood or from Rust Belt states who lost their jobs. I don't know about that. My dad was this poor kid from West Virginia, and literally so poor, his teeth rotted. And only way he escaped was joining the United States Navy and serving his country very proudly. And so I would hope when somebody reads this book and puts it down that they maybe step back and assess, who we are. It's like Lenny Mae, who am I? Who am I? Who was this man that was my father? Who are we? And get back to the core things that we know are true about ourselves as a nation.
Yeah, so we also have a question from Naya. She also, I think, yeah, so let me open yeah, I
Hi,
think,
this is Najla.
yeah, go
Najla,
ahead, we can hear you now.
I mean, you talk about forgiveness, that forgiveness is what is going to allow us to come back together. And I'm thinking, no, it's really more integrity. We are not acting with integrity. We have lost our moral values. We are just putting people up there because we believe that we belong to one party or another. But if we go back to our moral values and our integrity, we would be much better off. Now, and also the fact that money has infiltrated our political our government so much is just sickening. We have lost our democracy. So I am struggling very much for this upcoming election, and so are many people. We can't vote for Trump, but we can't even vote for Biden after the massacre that's happening in Israel, in Gaza. So I commend you for trying to do something, but I think we should try not to look back, but look forward and try to prevent future catastrophes. We should all be in the streets right now asking for a stop to this genocide. We should all be asking questions as to why is America building a pier in Gaza and dropping in air food, pretending that they cannot open the gates in Israel to get the stuff to Gaza, but yet the gates get open to get all the material that they need for the pier, for building the pier. We should be asking questions now, and we should be stopping this madness. We should be asking for our government, our elected officials to do what we are asking them to do. 80% of the population of the Democrats are asking for a ceasefire, yet our senators are not doing it. Why?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. It's hard. It's so hard to watch this, isn't it? And, when I talk about forgiveness in the story, Lainey May finally finds it in her heart to forgive her bitter, angry mother before she dies for being bitter and angry, and for the hurt that she has felt from what she thought her husband was doing that night. And so in that context, when she forgave her mother, she opened up a second chance for both of them. And in fact, the mother does try to talk to her, but it's too late. It's too late. So I don't want it to be too late for our nation. I don't want it to be too late for us to talk to each other. I'm thinking about during the last presidential election, just as many of us may have done, getting into debates and making comments on Facebook or wherever about certain issues and certain candidates. And I lost somebody that I had known for a long time. I lost a friend, and that made me very sad. And I felt completely justified in doing that. But I have refriended this person, and I let them say what they want to say. And in that sense, there's been some healing on both of our sides. And that's the kind of healing that I want. That doesn't mean that I advocate terrible things and governments doing illogical, horrible things. But as a people and within our families, finding some way, and for our own sake, really, they say forgiveness, really, it's that second chance. It's the ultimate second chance. You don't forget. In fact, in the novel, the story ends on 9/11, and Laney Mae and her son are driving home, and she's had a wonderful outcome, and they drive literally right into the Pentagon being attacked on their way home. And before that happens, she's talking to her son about forgiving her ex-husband, about him forgiving his father for not being in their lives. And when he gets home, he said, you're wrong, Mom. He sees these terrorists doing these things. He says, I'm not ever forgiving those people, who did these awful atrocities on 9/11 and other times. And she doesn't really know what to say, except that there are going to be dark days. And on those dark days, we have to let the light that's inside of us shine. And when we don't, and when we fade into the background, we let the darkness win. And so speaking up and being active and engaged and caring enough about what's going on makes a big difference. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your perspective on that.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to go to Dulce, and based on, I'm going to open your mic, and Dulce, we have your wonderful comments in the Q&A, but the audience can't see those, at least not right now. So why don't you go ahead, and you've obviously read the book, so you can tell Toni directly how much you liked it. Go ahead, Dulce.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to mention how much I loved reading The Road to Second Chance and how it touched me deeply. And it brought both laughter and tears in turn. I was just curious because you shared that your book is historical fiction and there are also elements of your own family's history in it. Just wondering if the personal story made it more difficult for you to write your novel or easier because you were entrenched in thinking about it.
That's really good. I would say that it helped. I think that it helped because I feel like I was sure from the beginning where it was going to go. I mean, not every little page and every little twist and turn of the story, but I knew ultimately that there was a message. And I've mentioned my father, my love for him and my admiration for him, particularly for what he had to overcome and the poverty that he endured and the difficulty that he endured. And he also had a very sad relationship with his own father. And I think that was a big part of this. I never understood his own father rejected him. And I never understood it. I couldn't comprehend it. And so a lot of that came into this dynamic within families. And then, of course, in our larger society too, how we treat each other, how we do or don't forgive. But thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a couple questions from the Q&A, and one of them says, can you talk more about 9/11? I think you referenced that early on. How did that enter into the story, and what thoughts do you have on that?
Right. It's interesting. I was writing this, and then 9/11 happened, and I had gotten so far in the story. And when the September 11th terrorist attacks happened, I just stopped. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't write for about a year. I thought, this is what's important anymore. I mean, this is in this horror. I just couldn't. I couldn't keep going, and it literally was about a year before I started trying to write this again. A lot of stops and starts. And so for me, it was very profound to show that Kennedy's death and the effect and all these things going on, they don't stop. The bad stuff doesn't stop just because you think you've got all your answers. And that on those dark days, as Laney Mae tells her son, it's in here that keeps us going. It's the light. And I hope you will read the book because you'll sort of understand the context of that. And her hope and faith in her child, despite everything that they've seen and gone through. I think that the 9/11, I was very fortunate, I want to say, in having some individuals help me with their experiences. I had a retired Air Force pilot, Mark Valentine, who took time to talk to me. He was flying over the skies of Washington and the Pentagon that day, keeping us safe. But it was very scary. Any of you who lived here, you remember hearing those planes fly over. It was it was disturbing to know they even had to be up there. Neil Augenstein from WTOP, I know you probably all recognize Neil's voice and his name. He happened to be near the Pentagon that day and just kept reporting, and it was quite chaotic and nerve-wracking. And then Justin Torelli is a battalion captain with the Arlington Police Fire and Rescue. And that day, Justin shared his story with me. It was his first day driving the ladder truck for Arlington Fire, and they were sent to a kitchen fire in Rosslyn and got told, nope, you got to go to the Pentagon, not really comprehending what was happening. And that was his first day driving that ladder truck and battling the traffic on 66 to try to get to the Pentagon. So I'm so grateful. Many people helped me understand better and write better. And again, because it is historical fiction, I wanted to get it as right as I could in terms of what those days were really like, even living them, trying to get different perspectives.
Yeah, thanks, Toni, for that. Yeah, I mean, living in Washington, D.C., so many people have stories of 9/11 that we carry with us. Yeah, I have my own, but I won't share it here. But
We all do.
yeah, we all do. So I think you've answered part of this from John, but in the second half. So what motivated you to finish the novel? But also, are there plans to write another in the future? They say we'll have one book in us. You've got that one out. I don't know. Is there a second one?
Wow. I marvel at people that can just crank novels like James Patterson. It's so much work. And what's lonely, it's lonely when you're a writer, and no one cares whether you finish your story or not, really. You really have to self-motivate. And so I'm not sure about that, but I was motivated to finish it. My father passed away in 2019. My sister passed away suddenly in 2021. And then I lost my mother in 2022. And I had hoped to finish the story as a tribute to them, and I dedicate the book to them. But I didn't. But it motivated me to just really do the work. And again, it's really hard when you're sitting there alone writing. Nobody really cares whether you finish your story except you. And you have to decide, this is my story and I'm going to tell it the way I want to tell it. And the way I got it published was through independent publishing. It's sort of the new way to publish now. So I would encourage any of you out there who have stories that they want to share, whether they're fiction or not, to put your pen to paper, put your fingers to the computer screen and write and explore independent publishing for your story. It could be a memoir, it could be a novel, it could be a mystery. But you have to really motivate and be willing to do the work. And it's hard. And I can't imagine, this just took a lot, and I can't imagine writing another novel, but never say never.
Yeah, Toni, that's a good point. It is a lot easier to publish. It's not any easier to write, I suppose, than it ever has been, but easier to publish. A good point.
Right.
Yeah. So we have a kind of, I guess, follow-up comment more from Jerry that spoke earlier. It says, there's an irony in the current distrust of our government and Lincoln's description of a government of, for, and by the people. So I don't know if you want to just comment on his commentary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are the people, and I think sometimes that gets lost. And I don't know what we're going to do, though. AI and even the social media, just even a few years ago, it has just exploded, and misinformation is a terrible thing. So how do we ever determine what we're hearing? The deep fakes. Was that really Biden or Trump saying that, or was that a AI generated picture? Remarks. It's a very, very scary time, which I think reminds me that we need to just remember who we are, and don't forget that, and find our way forward in a very, very confusing world. In fact, when part one of the book, I quote, and I'm going to just pick it up so I don't misquote. I use an Emily Dickinson quote: "Hold dear to your parents, for it is a scary and confusing world without them." And I really think that that's sort of that says a lot about, how scary, even in her day, the world seemed, right? And how scary it really is now. And those parental bonds, they're not always strong, but the family, and it doesn't have to be the biological family, it can be our national family, hold tight to those things that you value.
Okay, yeah, I think we've taken care of all the Q&A and raise hands for the moment, but let me throw something out. You can do with it what you want. So since half of the people in the poll said that they do feel they haven't got all the whole truth, and I don't know all the different possibilities. What I've heard is that possibly the CIA, the mafia, Castro, Russia. I don't know. Do you want to just kind of what all is out there, and what's your thoughts on each possibility there, I guess?
Well, there's a really good recent podcast, the actor Rob Reiner and Soledad O'Brien I mentioned earlier. It's called Who Killed JFK? I believe it's 10 parts. To me, it was mesmerizing to listen to. Rob Reiner is a great storyteller. And, he really unpacks a lot of things. I learned a lot. And, I had my own, I read about the assassination. When I was in high school, I actually gave reports on the assassination and the unlikeliness of the magic bullet. Even in high school, I was doing this. So I learned a lot listening to that. And I think at the end of the day, we are just not ever going to know. But I think there's enough questions and enough things that are floating around out there that make one shooter improbable by ballistics, timing, the Zapruder film. So they come to the conclusion that it was the mafia and some anti-Castro forces on their own, with some help from some rogue members of the CIA, one person that Kennedy actually fired after the Bay of Pigs. So it's not, they back it up with some things, but it was convincing, I will say. It certainly just reinforced my views that something, we don't know everything.
Well, and I guess just one follow-up is, you mentioned the Warren Commission, and really that was the question, I think that was the one poll we got up, whether they were able to get to the bottom of it. So why is it that the Warren Commission wasn't able to kind of get to the bottom of it, I guess, best way to put it?
Yeah, I think that the powers that be, I think President Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, I think they wanted this wrapped up. Maybe their intentions were so that if there were foreign actors, we wouldn't go to war. Maybe they just wanted to move on. But that's really unfortunate. And I think probably President Johnson really did want to move on from this and get on with his agenda. And it's just a shame because so many people weren't questioned and so many obvious pieces of evidence were just, no, we're not going to look at that. Many witnesses who were there who could put Oswald downstairs during the shooting were never deposed by the Warren Commission. It was like we only want to talk to people who, confirm that Oswald was it. And that started from the beginning, almost as soon as he was arrested. This is our guy. You go back and watch some of the film of him being paraded in front of reporters. It's unbelievable. I think he asked for an attorney and they let him make a phone call. It was just, and then to have, the sheriff say, yep, we got our guy. This is him. So much for innocent until proven guilty. And I'm not saying Oswald was an innocent person. He probably was involved to some degree, but he himself said, I'm a patsy. And it's quite conceivable. And again, the Rob Reiner podcast is fascinating, if you care to listen and go a little deeper on that.
Okay, well, this has been fascinating. And I think we don't have any more questions.
Well, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you guys and your questions and appreciate the opportunity. Really do.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Toni, so much, and thank the audience for some very thoughtful questions.
Yeah.
And this has been great, and we've got
Wonderful.
lots of clapped hands. So I
Oh,
think,
yay.
yeah, I think the audience appreciated it. And,
Thank you.
and I'm glad
Appreciate
that we
it.
were able to open people's mics and have them ask you.
Yeah, that really adds to it. I like that very much. So thank you very, very much. And I